Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Afghanistan, a massive bombing near the German embassy in the capital, Kabul, killed more than 80 people, wounding over 350 during rush hour traffic Wednesday morning. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack so far, though the Taliban said they are not responsible. Officials have described today's bombing as one of the biggest blasts ever in Kabul. It shattered windows more than a mile away from the explosion center and blasted a crater more than 13 feet deep into the ground. Among those who were killed was Aziz Navin, who worked for the Afghan TV station Tolo TV, and Mohammed Nazir, who has worked as a driver for the BBC Afghan service for 4 years and was killed this morning as he was driving his co-workers to the office. Nearby hospitals were inundated with wounded patients after the blast. This is Ghulam Mohammed.
I was at my desk when I heard a terrible sound and became unconscious. I didn't know what happened to me, and a few minutes later, when I opened my eyes, I found myself under the desk and saw blood coming out of my shoulder. It was a dreadful explosion.
Today's bombing comes as the White House is weighing the Pentagon's proposal to send thousands more U.S. troops to Afghanistan. We'll go to Kabul for more on the bombing after headlines to speak with Tolo TV. President Trump escalated his feud with German Chancellor Angela Merkel Tuesday, taking to Twitter to threaten Germany over trade and NATO. Trump tweeted, "We have a massive trade deficit with Germany, plus they pay far less than they should on NATO and military. Very bad for U.S. This will change," he tweeted. Trump's complaints come after Chancellor Merkel called her meetings with Trump at the G7 summit over the weekend disappointing and said Europe had to take its fate into its own hands. European allies have expressed particular frustration over Trump's refusal to commit the United States to fulfilling its pledges to the landmark 2015 Paris Climate Accord. The New York Times reports Trump's inner circle is fiercely divided on the Paris Climate Accord, with Chief Strategist Steve Bannon and EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt demanding Trump withdraw from the accord, while Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Trump's daughter and advisor Ivanka Trump advocating for the agreement. On Tuesday, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on the U.S. to remain a party to the landmark accord.
Climate change are already being felt around the world, and they are dangerous, and they are accelerating. And so my argument today is that it is absolutely essential that the world implements the Paris Agreement and that we fulfill that duty with increased ambition. And the reason is threefold. Climate change is undeniable, climate action is unstoppable, and climate solutions provide opportunities that are unmatchable.
Former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn will turn over some subpoenaed documents to the Senate Intelligence Committee as part of its investigation into whether the Trump campaign colluded with Russia to allegedly influence the 2016 election. Flynn had previously said he would refuse to turn over any of the requested personal documents, instead saying he'd plead the Fifth. Now Flynn says he'll begin turning over subpoenaed documents that pertain to 2 of his businesses, as well as some personal documents, as early as June 6th. This comes as President Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, said he would not comply with a House Intelligence Committee request for information about his ties to Russian officials. Meanwhile, President Trump and the White House continue to complain about the use of anonymous sources and news reports about the ongoing investigation into the Trump administration's ties to Russia. This is White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer speaking Tuesday about recent leaks about the investigation into Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor Jared Kushner's attempts to establish a back channel of communication with Russia.
I'm not going to get into what the president did or did not discuss, but it is, what your question assumes is a lot of facts that are not substantiated by anything but anonymous sources that are so far being leaked out.
President Trump has also complained about the use of unnamed sources, tweeting over the weekend, quote, "Whenever you see the words sources say in the fake news media, they don't mention names. It's very possible those sources don't exist, but are made up by fake news writers. Fake news is the enemy," unquote. But on Tuesday, Trump retweeted a Fox News article based exclusively on a single unnamed source who said Kushner did not discuss a possible back channel with Russia during a December meeting with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak at Trump Tower. CNN is reporting President Trump is expected to roll back some of the U.S.'s new diplomatic and commercial relations with Cuba, which were brokered under the Obama administration. Unnamed U.S. officials say Trump may reinstate restrictions on Americans visiting Cuba and bringing back famous Cuba goods like cigars and rum. Officials also say Trump might demand the extradition of people who've received political asylum in Cuba, like Assata Shakur. Before becoming president, Trump's businesses violated the U.S. embargo on Cuba, secretly doing business in Cuba in the late 60s, then trying to cover it up. Trump's company, then called Trump Hotels and Casino Resorts, spent at least $68,000 in Cuba during a secret business trip to Havana. At the time, it was illegal under U.S. law to spend any corporate money in Cuba. In the Philippines, President Rodrigo Duterte has sparked outrage after he told soldiers that they could rape women with impunity in the region of Mindanao, where Duterte has declared martial law. In a speech Friday, the Philippine president said, quote, "If you happen to have raped 3 women, I will own up to it," unquote, implying he'd cover for the soldiers and take responsibility himself for the rape. In the past, Duterte has said he wished he'd been first in line in a gang rape of a woman who was raped and murdered in the 1980s. In Taiwan, the highest court has ruled against laws prohibiting LGBT couples from marrying, making Taiwan poised to be the first country in Asia to legalize marriage equality. The victory came after a long-time LGBT activist sued when he was prohibited from marrying his longtime partner. In its ruling, the court wrote, quote, "The freedom of marriage for 2 persons of the same sex, once legally recognized, will constitute the collective basis, together with opposite-sex marriage, for a stable society," unquote. Back in the United States, in Cleveland, the police officer who killed 12-year-old Tamir Rice has been fired, but not over the shooting of the African-American boy. In 2014, Officer Timothy Lohman shot Rice within 2 seconds of arriving at a Cleveland park where Tamir Rice was playing with a toy pellet gun. Neither Lohman nor his partner, Frank Garmbeck, administered any first aid after Lohman shot him. When Tamir's 14-year-old sister rushed to her brother's side, they tackled her to the ground, handcuffed her, and put her in their cruiser. Tamir died the next day. A Cleveland Police Department investigation concluded the 2 officers did not violate department policies in killing the child. But on Tuesday, officials said Lohman will be fired after a second investigation found he lied on his job application to the police department. Tamir Rice's mother, Samaria, said, quote, "I'm relieved Lohman has been fired because he should never have been a police officer in the first place, but he should have been fired for shooting my son in less than 1 second, not just for lying on his application," unquote. In North Carolina, undocumented grandmother Juana Luz Tobar Ortega is seeking sanctuary in an Episcopal church today to avoid her deportation. Ortega's lived in the United States since 1992, when she fled violence in Guatemala. She works as a sewing machine operator at a textile factory near her home in Asheboro, North Carolina. Since 2011, she's been reporting to annual required ICE check-ins without problems. But this spring, after President Trump took office, ICE officials instead ordered her to leave the country by today, May 31st. Instead, she's seeking sanctuary in efforts to remain in the United States with her 4 children and 2 grandchildren. And here in New York, Benjamin Yellow Benji Melendez, a gang leader who brokered an historic peace deal between rival gangs in the Bronx and Harlem, has died at the age of 65. Melendez was a Puerto Rican nationalist who was radicalized by a young member of the Black Panthers. In 1971, he was the leader of the Ghetto Brothers gang when one of the gang's members was murdered. In response, Melendez called for the historic Hoe Avenue peace meeting, which de-escalated gang violence in New York City for at least a decade. And this breaking news, the Axios News website says President Trump has decided to pull out of the landmark 2015 Paris Climate Accord. Axios is reporting this breaking news based on 2 unnamed sources. It has not been confirmed by the White House or other news outlets. Axios News says the sources had direct knowledge of the decision made by the Republican billionaire who has described global warming as a hoax perpetrated by China. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.